So, Dave, there does seem to be a lot of leaves about. So what is the best way to compost them, try and use them in a good way?
Well, it makes you wonder whether the leaves are still around after the wind we've had over the weekend. Absolutely. But it does depend on how much fallen leaf matter you've got, whether you've got a small garden or whether it's like ourselves, a very large allotment plot or a very large allotment site, or even a council, basically. Because on our sites we've had deliveries via the council's own collection lorries. And then now substantial piles of leaves in very large bins that we recently built. You might say that with the windy weather, I fully expected when I went down to the plot a few days ago to see the leaves absolutely everywhere, but in the bins. But fortunately, they're so heavy, and we've got so much leaf mould, or potential leaf mould, that it stayed where it is. So members literally will take what they need for their own plots and use the leaves as mulch around fruit trees and fruit bushes. And or add the leaf matter to the compost heap. So it's as and when you want to do it and how you actually want to do it. They'll also let the leaves rot down naturally and apply it to leaf mould to the ground later, and mix that with other compost materials, because leaf mould basically is very much an inert substance. After all, they're dead leaves which have fallen off the trees. So there's not a lot of nutrient in them, so you're going to need, if you're actually going to do that, to put it back as a compost or as a leaf mould, you need actually to mix other things with it to keep the nutrient levels up. So you can do this yourself in your own garden. You can collect the leaves, you can bag them for use next year as leaf mould. Make a few holes in the plastic bags and leave the bags in a quiet corner of the garden to rot down naturally. You'll use those next year. Obviously they do take some time because of the lignin that's in the leaf anyway. That has to be broken down. If you want to speed that up, there are the shredders, the commercially available shredders, and garden vacuum hoovers or vacuums that you can actually use. So they will shred the leaves, so they'll decompose a little bit quicker, as the leaves are already in a smaller size. Secondly, you can use the leaves as a mulch. Basically what you're doing there over the winter is adding warmth to the soil.
Yeah, insulation.
Insulation, basically, and you're also suppressing the few weeds that will still be around. There are always weeds, no matter what time of the year it is. That weed, or the plant that's growing where it's not very useful, will actually grow. So you can actually use leaf mould as a mulch, in effect. Thirdly, this may come as a bit of a surprise, but if you think about it, it's slightly at a tangent. Worms also play a crucial role in the whole process. They're masters at taking the leaf back down into the soil. Nobody knows particularly why, but they're very, very effective at doing it. It's a little bit like the one shoe on the motorway, or the case of the lost teaspoons. Teaspoons always go missing, don't they? So many people ask the question, where do the leaves go after you've actually seen them, and that which have been picked up has been picked up. So the worms basically have done a pretty proficient job at putting them back in the soil where they're best needed.
What plants are particularly ideal to plant at this time of year?
Of course, I suppose you could say that next year's spring bulbs should by now have gone in, and they are not necessarily dormant, but they're growing under the ground, and they'll be ready for sort of January, February, March and April next year. But on the vegetable side, there are still seeds that can actually be sown now, surprisingly enough. If you like broad beans, for instance, I know they're not everybody's cup of tea to mix them edible, but now's the time to sow them for an early crop next year. Some think that they're not so susceptible to next year's aphids. They will have topped themselves out before the aphids get a hold of them, basically, and you'll get earlier beans. So now is a good time to actually plant broad beans. What they will do is they will poke their heads above the ground, and they'll literally sort of remain dormant like that until the warmth comes back next spring, and then they'll crack on. It's also the time, believe it or not, to plant garlic, and also overwintering onion sets and shallots if the ground's not too heavy or it's not too waterlogged. So the last couple of days you would literally keep off the ground, simply because you'll be compacting it anyway. So they can still be planted into December if necessary as well. There is a tradition, I think I recall somebody actually saying there's a tradition of planting onion sets on Christmas Day.
Right.
That's the last thing that I personally want to be doing on Christmas Day. I think I'd sooner be tugging into roast potatoes and turkey rather than planting. But apparently it is done, or has been done, traditionally. Surprisingly, there's also varieties of pea which can be sown. Things like early onward, Kelvedon Wonder, Little Marvel. These are early peas which you can actually plant now to overwinter. They get a head start come springtime next year. Things which you should have been planting and which you should perhaps have been growing or sowing throughout the year, things like carrots, beetroots, parsnips, they can actually be left in the ground. In fact, where parsnips are concerned, I know it's a basic common root vegetable, but where parsnips are concerned, they like a bit of frosting because they get sweeter. They get very much sweeter. If you actually if you're growing parsnips and you push the earth away from the crown and you get some frost on it, the parsnips actually get sweeter. It's got that delightful parsnip taste.
Opposite to what you'd think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. Many plot holders have been planting spring cabbages and other brassicas for an early crop next year as well. For instance, I've just put mine in with a little bit of protection, i.e. a cloche or something just to cover them, keep the nastiness of the wind and the weather off them for the winter. It's also the time to plant out any bare-rooted bushes or trees that you may have ordered, raspberries, those kinds of things. If the weather's unsuitable for planting, heal the plants in by digging a trench or a hole in bare ground and then just cover them with soil. What that does, it keeps the roots moist and keeps them absolutely in the ground, and you know where they are as well. You tend to lose things over the winter. It doesn't dry the roots out, basically, and that way the roots get moist and they're protected from frost. There's a possible use actually for your fallen leaf as well. You can actually mulch over the top of them to keep them a little bit warmer. Plant those kinds of things in the intended position as soon as possible when the weather actually improves. So if you get some fine days in winter, as we do on occasions, get them out and put them where you actually want to put them. Bare fruit bushes, they're field grown and they're lifted during this dormant period, and the plants have little or no top growth at all. So the plant's roots can get established over the winter and they're ready to fire away come springtime. So it's not all dark days and waiting for the evenings to get longer. One other thing which is tangential to that, actually, if you're growing ornamental grasses in your garden, you leave them alone, I would suggest. Leave them alone. They look statuesque in the winter anyway. They look absolutely superb. Even when they've got some frost or snow on them, they look absolutely superb. They'll give your garden shape over the winter months, and they'll also feed small birds with the seed heads as well. Dual purpose. And you can cut them back in the spring when the new growth starts happening.